Introduction. I'm tired of being scared, and I know you are too. Not that there isn't a lot to be scared of in this world today, between the non-stop headlines about wars and nuclear power plants and terrorists and assassinations and civil unrest and economic uncertainty and political doublespeak and insane weather and an environment that's becoming unhealthier by the day. But a point comes when it's too much to deal with, and thinking about it accomplishes nothing more than sending you to bed with a cold cloth on your head. Then, just when you're already on enough overload, someone feels compelled to mention that according to the Mayan calendar, the world is going to end in 2012 anyway, so what difference does anything make, really? Or they heard, or read somewhere, that the Book of Revelation, or the Book of Daniel, or Nostradamus, or something, or someone says we'll all be dead in the next 2 years, or 5, or 10, or whatever, or that there are obvious signs that the end of the world is right around the corner. And of course it reminded them of some horrible movie they saw in which only a handful of people are left alive on Earth because of a giant asteroid, and these zombie-like survivors are wandering around deserted cities trying to kill each other over a crust of bread. It's almost enough to make you skip lying down on your bed and to opt for hiding underneath it instead. Almost. But before you do that, I can't encourage you enough to ask a few questions about these dire end-of-the-world predictions. Who were the Mayans, for example, and how did they arrive at a calendar that ends in 2012? What specifically do the books of Revelation and Daniel say that prove this impending doom, and what do we know about the circumstances in which they were written in the first place? Who was Nostradamus? Why is he credited with any more expertise about the end of the world than the rest of us? And is it true that his writing is so filled with symbolism that it's impossible to tell what he was talking about anyway? What are these obvious signs that our time on Earth is almost up? And just out of curiosity, have those same obvious signs ever cropped up before in the history of this planet and maybe been misinterpreted? As for this movie, did it claim to be a documentary? Is there really a legitimate reason to believe that an asteroid gigantic enough to destroy our world is headed toward us, or might be headed toward us any time soon? 99 times out of 100, the answer to any or all of these questions will be, I have no idea. If you've seen my television or personal appearances or read my books, you know how strongly I believe that knowledge is power and that the first thing to do when you're afraid of something is to educate yourself about it as thoroughly as possible. I would never say, don't be frightened about the end of the world, because, as you'll learn throughout this book, we humans are almost genetically predisposed to thinking about it and worrying about it. But I will say, very enthusiastically, learn all you can, form your own opinions, and maybe above all, find out if there's a choice to be made between ending this planet or saving it. This book, then, is devoted to replacing fear with fact, to proving that knowledge is power, and to offering the sincere reassurance that, even if the world should end tomorrow, and it won't, God will still keep us safe for all eternity, just as He promised when He created us. Sylvia Browne Chapter 1 The End of Days. Why this book now? Please don't leap to the conclusion that there's something urgently meaningful about the timing of this book. I promise you have time to read it more than once before the end of life on Earth. Actually, there are several reasons this book was at the top of my priority list. Many of them I'll discuss as the book progresses, in the context of the chapters themselves. But one of the most important reasons is also one of the most obvious. I've never been asked more often than I have been in the past couple of years about when the end of days is coming. What about the second coming of Christ? When should we start looking for him? Or is he here now? Is the Antichrist here already, and if not, when will he show up and who will he be? How literally should we take the biblical book of Revelation? Is the rapture really going to happen? Nostradamus made it sound as if the Antichrist is among us right now, and the Mayan calendar specifically says the world will end in 2012, which is right around the corner. Is that true? If not, when will it end, and how? When a subject comes up repeatedly among my clients, I naturally start wondering what's causing the coincidence. You do know there's no such thing, right? And I have a couple of theories. One is that maybe, in the wake of all the Millennium Y2K hysteria, and let's face it, hysteria is not too strong a word, there's a general feeling of having dodged a bullet, as if we somehow escaped an inevitability of total destruction and we're now living on borrowed time. Another related theory is that apocalyptic books, articles, television specials, and church sermons were wildly popular at the turn of this century, and even though the imaginary end of the world crisis has come and gone, the unease from all that information has continued to simmer in people's minds and is finally boiling over. Still another is, as you'll see in upcoming chapters, I know that as this century progresses, the spirituality on our planet is going to grow to unprecedented strength and power, as we humans, at long last, start paying attention to the spirit voices inside us, reminding us that, yes, it actually is time to get our affairs in order. That spiritual growth is already underway, causing more and more of my clients to think beyond their day-to-day lives and search for answers to the bigger questions of their own spirit's futures and the futures of every spirit currently residing on a planet that, according to countless rumors, isn't going to last forever. Several of these clients were experiencing the same understandable fear. They couldn't get past the feeling that the end of days must be approaching, or it wouldn't be on their minds to begin with. For them, and for all of you who share that fear, I'm here to offer concrete proof that we citizens of the world in the year 2008 aren't the first to feel sure that the end is so obviously imminent. Some historically verifiable examples: in approximately 2800 BC, an Assyrian tablet was etched with the words, "Our earth is degenerate in these latter days." There are signs that the world is speedily coming to an end. The Bible quotes Jesus as saying to his apostles, in Matthew 16:28, "There be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." And in Matthew 24:34, "This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." Both statements were taken by some to mean that Jesus would return before the apostles died. In around AD 90, the fourth pope, Saint Clement I, predicted that the end of the world was imminent. In the 2nd century, a Christian sect called the Montanists believed that Christ would return during their lifetime and that the New Jerusalem would come down out of heaven from God. And one Roman leader was so certain that the end of the world was only 2 days away that he and his followers disposed of their houses and all other belongings in preparation. In AD 365, a bishop named Hilary of Poitiers made the public declaration that the world would be ending during that year. Sometime between AD 375 and 400, a student of Hilary of Poitiers, St. Martin of Tours, braced his followers for a definite end of the world no later than AD 400. He also stated, "There is no doubt that the Antichrist has already been born." The middle of the first millennium saw a number of doomsday predictions, including that of Hippolytus of Rome, the antipope, who temporarily defected from the Catholic Church to protest its reformation, whose math convinced him that the Second Coming would occur 6,000 years after creation, or AD 500. Sextus Julius Africanus, a Roman theologian, was sure that the end of days was destined to occur in AD 800. Christians annually celebrate the Feast of the Annunciation on March 25, the day on which the Virgin Mary was visited by an angel and told she would give birth to the Christ child. In 992, Good Friday, the acknowledgement of Christ's crucifixion, coincided with the Feast of the Annunciation, an occasion that for centuries had been anticipated as the arrival of the Antichrist, closely followed by the end of the world according to the Book of Revelation. The year 1000 provided an opportunity for the first official millennium hysteria. It was further fueled by the disinterment of Charlemagne's body, since, according to legend, an emperor would someday rise from the grave to do battle with the Antichrist. Many authorities who had loudly proclaimed that the world would definitely end in the year 1000 explained their obvious miscalculation by realizing they should have added Jesus's lifespan to their prediction. As a result, the world would now reliably end in 1033. A priest named Gerard of Polda, on the other hand, was sure that Christ's 1,000-year reign had actually begun with Constantine's rise to power. Therefore, Satan would escape his bondage in 1147 and overtake the Church. John of Toledo, a Spanish astrologer, became convinced that a specific alignment of planets in 1186 was a sign that the world would be destroyed by famine, earthquakes, catastrophic storms, and volcanoes. According to an Italian mystic and theologian named Joachim of Fiore, the Antichrist was already incarnated on earth and would be defeated by King Richard I of England, heralding the great rebirth of the world in 1205. In 1260, Brother Arnold, a Dominican monk, predicted an impending end of the world in which he would call upon Jesus to judge church leaders around the world, during which Jesus would reveal the Pope to be the long-awaited Antichrist. Pope Innocent III announced 1284 as the end of the world, arriving at that date by adding 666 years, from the Book of Revelation, to the date when Islam was founded. In 1300, a Franciscan alchemist named Jean de Roquetaillade published such predictions as the arrival of the Antichrist in 1366, to be followed no later than 1370 by a millennial Sabbath, and Jerusalem becoming the center of the world. A society called the Apostolic Brethren, which believed that they were the new Roman Church authority, were sure that in 1307 all church clergy, including the Pope, would be killed in a great war that would lead to the Age of the Spirit. Czechoslovakian Archdeacon Militz of Kromeries insisted that the Antichrist would reveal himself by 1367, ushering in the end of the world. In 1496, many church leaders began anticipating the apocalypse based on the fact that it would soon be 1500 years after the birth of Christ. Astrologers predicted a massive global flood that would destroy the world in 1524. Reformist Hans Hut made it his business to round up 144,000 elect saints to prepare for Jesus's return in 1528. A German visionary named Melchior Hoffmann prophesied the second coming of Christ in 1533 and the re-establishment of Jerusalem in Strasbourg, Germany. Following the lead of the Book of Revelation, he believed that 144,000 faithful would be saved, but the rest of the world would perish in flames. Astrologer Richard Harvey foresaw the second coming of Christ at noon on April 28, 1583. According to Dominican monk, poet, and philosopher Tommaso Campanella, the Sun and Earth were destined to collide in 1603. In 1661, a group called the Fifth Monarchy men decided that by trying to overtake Parliament they could prove to God that faith was alive and well on earth, and it was time for Jesus to return and claim his rightful millennial kingdom. Christopher Columbus wrote the Book of Prophecies in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, including a prediction that the end of the world would happen in 1658. When the Russian Orthodox Church went through a reformation, a group that called itself the Old Believers broke from the Church and began its own ultra-conservative, ultra-traditional faith. Included in that faith was a belief that the world would end in 1669. Between 1669 and 1690 nearly 20,000 Old Believers burned themselves to death rather than be faced with the Antichrist. 17th-century Baptist Benjamin Keach saw the end of the world happening in 1689, as did French prophet Pierre Jurieu. Puritan minister and renowned witch hunter Cotton Mather predicted the end of the world 3 separate times, the first being 1697. On October 13, 1736, many braced for a great global flood predicted by William Whitson, a British theologian and mathematician. The renowned mystic Emanuel Swedenborg was told by angels that the world would end in 1757. Charles Wesley, one of the founders of Methodism along with his brother John, was sure that doomsday would occur in 1794. John Wesley disagreed with his brother about the timing of the world's end and stated that it was actually in 1836 that the beast of Revelation would rise from the sea and the new age of peace would begin. Presbyterian minister Christopher Love braced his followers for a massive earthquake that would destroy the earth in 1805. In 1814, a 64-year-old prophet named Joanna Southcott claimed to be pregnant with the baby Jesus and that he would be born on December 25, 1814. It so happened that instead of giving birth that day, she died, and an autopsy revealed, to no one's surprise, that she wasn't pregnant after all. Margaret MacDonald, a 15-year-old Christian prophet, declared in 1830 that the Antichrist was Robert Owen, a co-founder of socialism. It was a widely held belief that the Crimean War of 1853–56, during which Russia and France fought over which nation would seize Palestine from the Ottoman Empire, was actually the Great Battle of Armageddon prophesied in Revelation. 16th-century British prophetess Ursula Soudheil, who became famous and/or infamous as Mother Shipton, is quoted as saying, "The world to an end shall come" in 1881. It's since been theorized that the majority of Mother Shipton's prophecies were actually written and attributed to her after she died, and that her 1881 prediction was the work of her publisher, Charles Hindley. Joseph Smith, founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormon Church, is quoted as saying, "I prophesy in the name of the Lord God, and let it be written, the Son of Man will not come in the clouds of heaven till I am 85 years old." Smith would have turned 85 years old in 1890. As luck would have it, he'd been dead for almost 50 years by then. At the end of the 19th century, physicist William Thomson, aka Lord Kelvin, asserted that there was only enough oxygen in the atmosphere to last humankind for 300 years, and therefore the human race was destined to be suffocated to death. In anticipation of the November 13, 1900, doomsday they predicted, more than 100 members of a Russian cult called the Brothers and Sisters of the Red Death killed themselves on that date. On December 17, 1919, according to seismologist and meteorologist Albert Porta, a specific conjunction of 6 planets would create a magnetic current so powerful that it would cause the Sun to explode and engulf the Earth. Herbert W. Armstrong, who founded the Worldwide Church of God in the early 1930s, believed the rapture would occur in 1936 and that only members of his church would be drawn into Jesus's arms in the sky to be saved. When 1936 came and went with no rapture, he shifted his prophecy to the year 1975. Bible teacher Leonard Sale Harrison toured North America to lead a series of prophecy conferences during the 1930s, assuring his audiences that the world would end in 1940 or 1941. When the State of Israel was founded in 1948, there were many Christians who believed that the final predicted event leading to the second coming of Christ had been satisfied. Astrologer Jean Dixon predicted that this planet would be destroyed on February 4, 1962, by the force from a planetary alignment. Moses David, founder of a religious group called the Children of God, predicted that, probably in 1973, a comet would hit the Earth and eliminate all life in the United States. He then revised that prediction to include a Battle of Armageddon in 1986 and the Second Coming of Christ in 1993. In 1987, author and educator José Argels warned that unless 144,000 people gathered in specific places throughout the world on August 16 to 17 to honor the harmonic convergence, Armageddon was inevitable. NASA scientist Edgar C. Whisenant's book entitled 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Could Be in 1988 sold more than 4 million copies. Fundamentalist author Reginald Dunlop predicted that since September 23, 1994, was the last encoded date in the Great Pyramid of Giza, the world was clearly not meant to survive beyond that date. The year 1999 was thought to be the definite end of the world by, to name just a tiny handful, the Seventh-day Adventists, the Jehovah's Witnesses, linguist Charles Berlitz, spiritual historian Father Charles Moore, retired electronics engineer Gerald Vano, spiritualist Eileen Lakes, rocket scientist Hideo Itokawa, Messianic Rabbi Michael Rood, televangelist Jack Van Impe, former NASA consultant Richard C. Hoagland, and former businessman, politician, and cult leader Joseph Kibwe-Tier. Michael Travesser, born Wayne Bent, is a former sailor and now the spiritual leader of a New Mexico sect called the Lord Our Righteousness Church. Travesser claims to be the long-awaited Messiah and predicted that the world would end with an apocalyptic event at midnight, October 31, 2007. The Lord's Witnesses, a British sect, after an intricate series of calculations based on biblical prophecies, concluded that the United Nations would take over the world in the lunar month preceding April 24, 2001, which happens to be 666 Hebrew months following the founding of the United Nations. Since that didn't happen, it's probably safe to assume that we don't need to worry about their second prediction that after the United Nations gains global control, Armageddon will begin on March 21, 2008, killing 3/4 of the world's population. We'll be discussing many more end-of-days prophecies throughout this book, and even then we won't have scratched the surface of the human search for just one reliable hint about what's to become of us. I'll be weighing in with my own predictions as well, not to add to the confusion but because I do think there are aspects to the end of days that aren't addressed often enough, while other aspects get far more attention and credibility than they deserve. 3 general end-of-the-world categories. While it's not true in each and every theory of the end of days that we're about to explore, it's certainly true in general that end-of-the-world theories and prophecies fall into one of 3 categories: millennialism, apocalypticism, and messianism. Millennialism, which is obviously a derivation of the Latin word for 1,000 years, revolves around a belief that the earth will be subjected to a series of devastating catastrophes after which the saved of humankind will spend eternity in the bliss of paradise. At first glance it might appear that millennialism means we should all fly into an end-of-days panic at the turn of a millennium, as if there's some implied doom in any calendar date that has 3 zeros in it. And according to history, we weren't the first global population to fall into that mental and emotional trap. In reality, though, as we'll explore in depth in Chapter 3, millennialism has its roots in the biblical book of Revelation, the Apostle John's prophecy, or nightmare, or political essay, on the end time. In chapter 20 John writes, "Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years were ended. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom judgment was committed. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God, and who had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received its mark on their foreheads or hands. They came to life again, and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life again until the 1,000 years were ended. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be loosed from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations to gather them for battle. And they marched up over the broad earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city, but fire came down from heaven and consumed them, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever." It's not hard to read those verses and understand why the cultural significance of a 1,000-year period exists to this day, whether or not those who believe in that significance and are concerned about it have any awareness of the Bible at all. Apocalypticism is a theory of the end of days that involves God channeling his wrath toward the earth with a series of cataclysmic events, then judging each human according to their deeds on earth and finally taking his rightful place again as the creator and supreme ruler of heaven and earth. Probably the deepest roots of apocalypticism are found in the Old Testament book of Daniel, as illustrated in the following excerpts. "I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand upon 2 feet like a man, and the mind of man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side, it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, 'Arise, devour much flesh.' After this I looked and lo, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, terrible and dreadful and exceedingly strong, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped the residue with its feet. A king of bold countenance, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, and he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people of the saints. An anointed one shall be cut off, and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its ends shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed, and upon the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. And there shall be a time of trouble, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. And then there's Messianism, which revolves around the premise that at the end, a Messiah, from the Hebrew word meaning anointed, or Savior, will appear on earth to lead the faithful and devout people of God from the suffering and oppression they've endured into an eternity of divine, peaceful joy. While the most obvious examples of Messianism are found in the Christian and Jewish faiths, we'll discover that there are other great religions as well that continue to look for a Messiah to arrive before the end time and deliver them safely into God's arms. Among the reasons I believe humankind has been historically fascinated with the subject of the end of the world is that, despite God's promise over and over again that we're all genetically eternal, our conscious minds find the earthly pattern of beginning, middle, and end much easier to grasp than the concept of eternity. We hear the fact that on the other side there is no such thing as time, that nothing exists but a perpetual now, and we understandably find it impossible to imagine, since on earth we're virtually obsessed with time. We're told by brilliant theologians and spiritual leaders that this planet is not our real home at all, that our blissful, sacred home is waiting patiently for us to leave our bodies and get back there where we belong, but we can't consciously remember having lived anywhere else, so how can somewhere else be home? All things considered, then, it can't be too surprising that a beginning, middle, and end-oriented society consumed with the notion of time-related questions like when, and how much longer, and clinging fiercely to earth in the mistaken belief that it's the only home we know wants answers, always has and always will. Whether or not the following chapters provide answers or simply raise more questions, at least we'll know that just by asking, we're expressing curiosity about a subject as timeless as humankind itself.